Money's all I need. Everything I wanted.
I'm never gonna make that quieter.
Wake up!
What's up? Welcome to Better by Bitcoin episode. What is this? 007?
007. James Bond episode.
Today we have a few new faces. We're going to be doing an episode today on, it's going to sound like this is like a Bible study. It's on the parable of the talents. My name is Anton Syme. I'm a filmmaker, director of photography. I did the movies No Safe Spaces, What is a Woman, Am I Racist? I am in no way a theologian. So I'm going to introduce this topic, although doing theology is way out of my depth, but we're going to bring it all together, bring it back to Bitcoin. So I guess we can start out by just letting everybody else introduce themselves. JD, you want to go first?
Sure. So I am JD. My goal and just kind of thing in life is like the Bitcoin ad guy. I love telling stories, love doing advertising, and I just really want to help move Bitcoin into the mainstream ad space with just storytelling. What about you, Bondor?
My name is Bondor. I have had, a career in finance, music, film, teaching, and engineering most recently. And I've basically seen firsthand how fiat destroys all of these industries from the inside out. And I'm here for Bitcoin. So been a Christian for a long time too. But yeah. Who's next? We got Jordan and Brandon.
Jordan.
Yeah. So I'm the executive director of TGFB Media. We exist to help Christians understand and use Bitcoin for the glory of God and the good of people everywhere. I have served as a missionary, a pastor, living in overseas in Uruguay. And I help Christians try to think about Bitcoin in ways that aren't intuitively obvious to them.
And Brandon.
Yes, thank you. I'm Brandon Gentili. I am a former college hockey player, professional hockey player turned business guy for 10 years. Really a real estate guy, real estate investor. And just the last handful of years, really became a Bitcoin specific author, educator, podcaster, and help Bitcoin trading cards as well with their back end and marketing and everything as well. So that team there, and that is really my last 15, 20 years.
Love it. Fun fact, if anybody didn't know it, well, I don't know if I'm supposed to out it, but when there's Satoshi for Bitcoin trading cards, somebody here might have been in that costume. But anyway, that was a fun adventure. Anton, you want to kick us off with your thoughts on this?
All right, sure. So Parable of the Talents, what is it? It's a story in the Bible, and it is Jesus speaking to the disciples, telling a parable. And you hear this get brought up. You hear it. Well, okay, let me backtrack a little bit. You hear people sometimes in the progressive camp, especially on social media, sometimes just say that Jesus was a socialist. And another interesting thing about the Parable of the Talents, within the Parable of Talents, and I'll tell the story of what it is real quick, but he says the line, to each according to his ability, which you may hear that line and think, wait, isn't that Karl Marx? Yeah. To each according to his ability, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need, is what Karl Marx said. So Karl Marx, the author of the Communist Manifesto, basically bastardized scripture. So it gets really confusing for people. But in this parable, Jesus tells a story of a master, basically you could call him like a capitalist or like a business owner, a guy with money. And he has 3 servants. And in the story, he gives to one servant 5 talents, which I didn't do the math on this. I have it at one point. Didn't you guys know what a talent is and like a weight of silver by chance? Anybody know? I feel like it's
looking up right now.
Yeah, it's something like a year's worth of wages or something.
Grok, help us, Grok.
Somebody can look that up while I'm telling it. So he gives one guy 5 talents, which is silver, essentially. He gives him a bunch of silver coins. He gives another guy 2 talents, and he gives another guy 1 talent. He goes on a journey, and he says, steward over this. Basically, take this, invest it, make me some money, and when I come back, show me what you've done.
It was
The
a
guy
silver
who had-
talent, it was 9 to 12 years wages, and if it was a gold talent, it was 15 to 20 years wages.
Okay, I think these are silver, so it's a ton of money, actually.
Yeah, one biblical
So-
talent is about 75 pounds.
Wow.
Wow, of gold.
What's the dollar value of 75 pounds of gold?
600,000 US.
Oh my
currently.
gosh. Okay, it's a lot of money. So he's essentially given these guys this upstart capital and said, hey, I'm going to give you this money. Just go out, start businesses, and let's expand my empire. And so the guy that he gave 5 to, that guy went out and successfully ran businesses and was able to make enough profit that he made double the amount of money back. So he was originally given 5 talents. He made 10. The guy that was given 2 made 4. So he doubled it. The guy that was given 1 did nothing but basically bury it in the ground and was like, this greedy capitalist boss of mine, I'm not gonna work for him. I'm not gonna risk his money. Basically, the guy didn't trust himself, but is calling the guy who gave him the money greedy. And so when the master comes back, everybody comes together and he looks over the businesses and he's like, wow, the guy that I gave the most to, was able to give me a return of the exact same amount. The guy that I gave the second most to, same thing. The third guy calls him greedy to his face. And then the master throws out the guy who had the least. So it's a story of meritocracy, and it's a story that is honoring of business, of building something, of making a profit. So basically, Jesus was very much not a socialist. He was a capitalist. What I find so interesting about this story, aside from that, is now we have Bitcoin, which is something that sort of exists outside of capitalism. And I think there's a lot of implications for everybody, but for Christians specifically. There's another really interesting thing about Bitcoin. It's the only money that doesn't have Caesar's face on it. It's not, no country owns it. And so there's interesting applications for that for Christians as well, because, in the Bible, there's another story where somebody tries to trick Jesus, basically brings him this coin and says, should we pay taxes? And he's like, whose face is on the coin? It's Caesar's. It's Caesar's money. So, feel free to give it to him. God is the one who provides all of your income anyway. So if you trust God, you should, not be concerned about paying taxes and stuff. But Bitcoin doesn't have anybody's face on it. So after saying all that, what are you guys' thoughts on this?
In the biblical context of Bitcoin, rather, or
Yeah.
well, I guess stir the pot a little bit. So actually, let me stir the pot. Jordan, knowing your history as a missionary, how do you think this, the story of the talents kind of resonates in the Bitcoin era with people in Venezuela or people just in Latin America or the greater South when it comes to, do you think they actually can get back to believing that you can get ahead because they've been pushed down so hard?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they have a problem thinking about getting ahead. I think that this story is really important because the thing that you hit on the fact that, God isn't a socialist and God doesn't, again, he true generosity is volitional generosity. It just doesn't mean a government telling you have to do this and, saying we have control over all these things. We're going to force you to be generous. That's not generosity. And so what you see here is, in this story, it's really, really interesting. And the reason I think it's important is because we don't have any framework for what the scriptures and what God thinks about money, what God thinks about generosity. We are so far, it's kind of like the phrase you hear, late stage capitalism, which is a whole fraught phrase in and of itself. But you have this thing where everyone just like, oh yeah, late stage capital, sure, yeah, and it's just like we act like we understand what these things mean, even though we really don't have the first clue. And so I think that this passage can be one that's helpful to start to form and like lay out and kind of articulate a biblical understanding of economics more broadly, in addition to just investing. There's lots of things here. So like just the idea of like God giving people not the exact same amount, that's offensive to a whole lot of people. Like God doesn't just give everybody the same amount. So God is not a radical egalitarian in this sense. Do we have a problem with the fact that Elon Musk, is a quadrillionaire and the rest of us aren't? Well, no,
Yes.
That's
Oh, sorry.
that's
Just
okay.
for me.
That's fine, and again, we could get into details, and obviously there's exceptions to this. There's different ways of making money that are more or less licit and moral than others. But I still think this is it's a helpful thing to think about. Just the fact that you have some sort of framework, because most of us, we're just kind of grasping, we'll just, this is what I've heard, this is what I see, and just try to normalize things. And so I just think it's one of these things where you need to, I think we're in a moment where, again, people don't know what things are, and we don't have a framework by which to determine what we do know. So like, we don't have like the big $5 word is like epistemological framework. Epistemology is just, how do you know what you know? And so I think that we're in a moment where people are really struggling to try to figure out, how do we really know anything? And so you have people on the left who are saying, well, this is what I feel, and so I'm gonna trust my feelings. This is what my body, I feel out of place in my body, and so I this is how I know. I know what I should do because I might feel this way. And so I think that's one source of epistemological truth. And then I think there's a whole bunch of other ones that that other groups use. And so I think that, again, just having this verse and this passage, and I think Christians need to start thinking about how to help the people around them, whether they're Christians or not, think through and acknowledge, and understand the difficulties that they're enduring and kind of why those are.
Brandon, do you have any thoughts on because I'm curious, kind of double clicking from your perspective, because I know you have, the athlete perspective, and I'm very curious if there's an angle to like the number of NFL stars and the number of NHL stars are just athletes who go professional, but then they lose everything, right? Like, why do you think that is? And do you think it's like, is it a lack of God? Like, is it a lack of understanding of something like this, where it's like, hey, you kind of have to, like, because the word is stewardship, right? It's like, do they not learn how to be good stewards? Like, I don't know. I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, this is something I think about a lot, just in terms of how does a society collapse, I guess, like what comes first. And I probably talked about this with you, JD. I probably talked about it with you, Jordan. Like, just like, what comes first? Is it God that leaves society first, or like the people remove themselves from God, from truth, and then the money goes? Or is it the money that goes first, and then it becomes people just unravel, and then like God goes right after that, or just morality? So like, what comes first? You always come back to like, okay, yeah, people leave God, people leave truth first, and then it's very easy for the money to become corrupted. And someone, I think Anton was saying earlier, a quick aside is that like Bitcoin, the monetary layer, I think because I was just talking over Christmas about this with a couple of family members, and they were getting very confused in thinking that the money was intricately linked to the economic system you have. So like, it's very timely, I guess, talking about Karl Marx, right? Where in this parable about people like interlinked, like thinking like capitalism and inflation are like natural, like that, like inflation's a natural law, like that, like that's just part of life. Like that's how money works. And couldn't be further from the truth, where money is the foundation. It's the bedrock, pulling on another, thinking about another verse in the Bible, but being, you build your house on rock, or, instead of sand, right? So monetary bedrock is there. That's what undergirds the financial system. And then you build your system on top of that, whatever you choose. I mean, it could be socialism, it could be capitalism, it could be whatever it is, but when you corrupt that bedrock, or you're building on sand, which would be fiat, then I mean, you can put anything, as we see, you can put capitalism, the best thing we found to run a human economic structure, and it still is going to collapse over time. This is where Jordan, you made me think of this, where the like late stage fiat, because that it's not capitalism that's failing, it's the monetary bedrock that's on sand. It's late stage fiat, because now everything's just falling and collapsing and imploding in on itself. So and then bring it back to just the parable itself. I think, again, it's such a great parable because it's showing as well, like you can't, it's okay to, Christians, I think, have a hard time just being okay with wealth at times. Right. And it's okay to go multiply your wealth. We need to go multiply our wealth to go then really combat evil all over the place, and combat darkness and disinfect darkness. And a lot of times you have to have wealth in order to do that. And then the other half time you don't. You can be Mother Teresa, you could be extremely poor or in poverty or whatever it might be, and doing good works. But another way, a big way to combat that is to have wealth, and then go and do good deeds with that wealth. So I think it's a great parable to talk about, because there's so many, you can just take so many ways with it.
When I was younger, I used to think that I look at these like tribes that existed, like the Kung, I think they're called the San and the Kalahari, and they were like these egalitarian tribes. And I would look at them. They didn't have anything. They didn't have buildings. They just were hunter-gatherer tribes. And I would think those people are basically the best people in the world. Like, essentially, I thought that they didn't have sin, that their society just functioned perfectly. And it turns out that's not true at all. And that throughout history, basically all tribes have had warfare against each other. They have all the same struggles that we have. They just don't have the technology to build things. So what do you guys think about the idea of like cultivating and gardening and building, and then like how will a world in which Bitcoin is gaining more and more value, how will it change the way that we cultivate the world and our role in that?
I'm really curious your take on this, Bondor, because you actually, both of you guys have lived in LA longer than I have, but like, I'm very curious if cities will ever be built like Los Angeles again. And it's actually interesting because like half of Los Angeles just burned down. But being raised back up,
way less than half. But yeah,
I know.
Yeah,
1%.
I wish you were half. I wish you were half.
Oh, come on, man.
But it was some of the best
real
stuff that burned down. I mean, Malibu, the Palisades, Altadena was amazing.
I know, it's wild. But the question is like, is it going to be rebuilt on a big, like, we're still in fiat land, right? But do you think there's a chance that some of the thinking that goes back into the reconstruction is like a Bitcoin bedrock, kind of like what Brandon was talking about? Like, can the foundation be Bitcoin? And then it's like, is the stewardship of this space going to be different? Or do you think it's just going to be, it's actually going to get worse? Like, people are going to put like an 80-story high rise with 70,000 sardine cans and just try and fill it with illegals with North Sanctuary City.
Yeah, it'll be 80,000 story sardine high rise, of course, because Bitcoin's going to take a long time to make its way through the culture, and that's just the way it is. That's how the growth is going to happen, because it's all bottom up, not top down. You can't just say, "Great, everyone use Bitcoin." Even in El Salvador, where they've tried to do that, the people in El Salvador, like, some of them are like, "Yeah, this is great." But the vast majority are like, no thanks. Just give me what I'm used to. But to bring it back to the parable of talents, because there is an interesting thing. There's an interesting dynamic here. The fundamental like assumption in a parable of talents situation is that they had monetary metals as their money, right? Which are inherently inflationary as you mine more monetary metals. So that's why like there's this assumption in the parable that says, we are, if you just bury it, that's going to be worse than if you had put it in the with the bankers, because there's an inflationary dynamic at play that says like it's actually like you're actually losing money by just burying it, because there is inflation, right? Now, you put it in the bankers, you get the interest, and so you're actually, quote unquote, keeping pace with that inflation. Now, the inflation is, of course, super small because they don't have extreme mining situations like they do now. But I think that's a part of the parable. Now, to bring it back to your question, how does Bitcoin actually change this in particular? Because we're no longer going to be in that inflationary world. It's going to be 0% inflation, like hard stop. When you bury it in the ground, like that is actually probably going to be a wise choice in some capacities. It's going to be more wise than putting it at the banker where it can like get hacked and stolen and, you know, rehypothecated, etc. Right? So the understanding of the parable of the talents is going to change in the future. I mean, the root truth of there, like the root truth that we've been trying to get across, you know, be responsible stewards doesn't change, but the culture around how it views this parable is going to change. It's going to be interesting. In fact, I'd love to hear Jordan's immediate thoughts on that. But yeah, I've thought about this a couple times, and I'm like, it's very weird. Like there's going to be weird things that happen, and how do we prepare for that? Like, because we're entering a brand new world here. We've never seen anything like this, apart from very small situations where the trade was cut off, and so the monetary inflation was literally zero and all that. But yeah, it's going to be a strange time. Jordan.
Yeah, I think still, again, while granting this is new in some ways, I think the temptations of all these things that are described in this passage are still going to be true. So like one of the things you look at, I mean, you could see some of this attitude just in the way that, you know, at least with the conversations that I have with Christians today, right? Like I'll say, hey, you should talk about, you should invest some money in Bitcoin. You know, like if you got some long-term savings, like, put some into Bitcoin. And you have this, people are like, oh, it's too volatile. They have like this, it's this fear of the Bitcoin's volatility. And so there's really at root is like a fear of risk. And so you see the interesting thing about this passage is you have the two people who assumed risk are the ones who are commended because it was skillful risk. It wasn't just rash, do whatever, has no correspondence with reality. It was skillful, calculated, wise risk. And then you have the guy who, again, is the kind of took the safe bet, which for a lot of people, especially when they think about Bitcoin, they think about investments more broadly, like they think they're being faithful by not assuming risk. And in the case of this one, the master in this passage rebukes the guy because because of the justification for the risk or the lack of risk taking. So he says his excuse is right there in verse 24. I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you didn't sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. So he's basically saying like you get something for nothing. Like I knew you to be a hard man who gets something for nothing, and so I was afraid and I buried it in the ground. And so you see this. Elsewhere you can see this same kind of thing. This is a sinful fear that prevents you from taking risk that would demonstrate a faith in your master, or in our case, the bigger picture, like a faith in God. And so I think that this is a really important thing. If you're going to apply this to Bitcoin, there is a real time for the assumption of necessary risk. And I think that we're in a moment when, like, buying Bitcoin, obviously there's a risk associated with that. Anything could happen. We actually could see solar flares that, burn up every computer and whatever and render all of that uses. It's certainly possible. But there's also other risk of just the government continuing to steal from you by, creating money out of there. Those are far more real. Those are happening in real time. So I think that's one thing. I also think the way that the master's response is telling. So whereas the man who buried his talents, he attributed it to fear. He said, I was afraid to do this. And so I buried it because I was afraid of you. It's kind of like a little shot at the master. But the master responds, wicked and slothful servant. So he just basically, the master, who is supposed to be like the actual perspective here of what's going on, he attributes the burying of the talents of the silver or the gold, whatever, in the ground to wickedness and slothfulness, laziness. This guy didn't want to work hard to do something hard. And so the easiest thing was just to bury it in the ground, and then you can kind of blame the master. It's very similar to what we see, and I think this is deliberate. There's a lot of parallels between this passage and the passage in Genesis 3. You have Adam and Eve, they blame God. Basically, Adam says, "The woman you gave me," the serpent who is here. They blame everybody but themselves. And so I think there's a lot of parallels there. And so I do think that, again, one of the things that we need to do is just call Christians to be brave, and call Christians on their their tendency towards wicked and faithless risk avoidance. And so, yeah, I think in terms of how it's going to affect, again, you're going to have people who are willing to, assume risk, and you're going to have people who are going to be afraid of doing that. And, and again, there's still going to be opportunities to seek yield, in the case of, bankers that, are described here. You're still going to have places that are offer you yield on your Bitcoin. You're still going to have places that are going to offer you more yield and be more risky. And, again, I think there's a time and a place potentially for some of those things, but I do think it's going to be Bitcoin, just due to the nature of it, at least in the next 10 years or so. You won't have to pursue the same kind of insane risk that you're kind of forced into in a situation where the currency is so far debased. So there's a lot of different ways we could go, but yeah.
Do you think, Brandon, I got a random hot take too, but I know the adage is, if you want to control the people, you give them bread and circus. Do you think we're going to see a world when we get further down the Bitcoin path where sports becomes less important, or is it going to become more important? I'm very curious, actually, your take as an athlete. Do you think Bitcoin makes it more valuable to have a skill being a pro hockey player or a pro basketball player or whatever it is, or is it actually going to change it? And how do you think that's going to happen?
It's definitely going to change. I think about this a fair amount too. There's a lot of me that, one of the reasons I left, whatever it was, 12 years ago, was because it was people I didn't want to be around. Again, this is the fiat endgame, like late stage fiat, like we were talking about earlier. So this is, you kind of devolve into celebrity, athletics is just, people that are, you think as a kid, right? You think oh, these are great people. These are in essence, the best of the best. These guys get after. If anyone's listened to any of David Goggins stuff over time, not necessarily a Christian thing here, but any of his stuff over time, he talked about getting into the SEAL teams and in the Navy, and then being all right, guys, let's get after it. And everyone's like, what do you mean, man? We're good. We made it, he's like, what? What do you mean? Where's the next finish line? Let's get after it. Let's get even better. And most people are just kind of yeah, we're good. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a lot like athletics. That's I'm sure a lot like Hollywood or whatever it is. People get this certain echelon, and people just keep falling off over time to their levels of comfort of and there's only a very few amount of select few people that I think really just constantly are getting after it. And it's a very small percent, maybe a couple percent of the population. And that's about it. And quite honestly, I think it's a lot of the Bitcoiners are in that group of people who are just, they're highly regarded people, right? And there's maybe something a little bit off with them. And there's
cosmically, maybe.
There's always another finish line, but I think it's that segment of society that really takes life to that level. I mean, you look at again, I talk about the American Revolution a lot, and it was only a couple percent of people that fought and gave the other 97% freedom. You think about it, it's most people were British loyalists, Tories or whatever they were calling them, and they were ratting on the American patriots and saying, hey, they're in there, and most people weren't. They were just fine to just well, the king said he's only going to tax us 2% or 5%, whatever it was. And they were just fine to just be serfs of the state still. And hey, we're at least over here. But there was a couple percent of people who were no, we're, it's kind of like the crypto reserve, right? What happened this past week? This got crypto reserve got announced. And what do you see? A bunch of weaponized officers being no. This is not how this goes. That's one of the bets. I mean, I was telling my wife, that's one of the bets I have on Bitcoin. Yeah, the technology of it is superior, all these different aspects, but part of the bet to me is dude, these people in Bitcoin are highly regarded, man. They are not going to go down. They will all die on that hill. And those are the people I want to put my money with. And that's generally how I am as a human being. So I align with that. and you know, I don't know, call it martyrdom or, you know, whatever you want to call it. It's like, I'm not going to put any of us in that class, but I think there's a lot of people in Bitcoin that will take it to that level, quite honestly, and seeing that this is this economic system that undergirds all this, you know, like all these parables, you kind of look through all these things, and what was the common theme of a lot of people who were doing said thing, or they wouldn't compromise on those values, or they wouldn't compromise on their truth, or, you know, or morality or natural law, whatever it was. The people that are willing to put their life on the line and to uphold those things. So I think that, you know, I didn't answer most of your sports question, but in saying that, I hope it should be somewhat obvious that, like, I'm not pushing any of my kids to be in sports. Like, do they play sports? Yeah, they do. I don't care what level they're at. Like, to me, athletics, and my wife was an athlete as well, played at Michigan State, was an athlete as well. And it was just like, we kind of looked back, we're like, dude, it's just like a bunch of losers that you're kind of around all throughout. I'm not saying just at Michigan State, right? But like all throughout, there's people that I didn't want to be involved with. They weren't trying to get after it. They weren't the best versions of themselves. And it's just, you kind of look at it and you're like, well, why? Like, what do we do this for? So anyway, I hope it becomes less of a, like all the sports gambling, all the things that have happened. I hope Bitcoin helps correct a lot of these things, right? Like, all these things have sprung up because of late stage fiat, where people are out the risk curve gambling on things because they feel like they have to, or maybe it's because they literally have to. They have to buy lotto tickets all the time. And I hope that changes. And we've now bastardized and destroyed much of the sports. And I think humans always want to compete. I hope we do. I'm trying to like square the circle somehow of like, because I think it's a tricky topic. Like, I hope sports becomes more prevalent in the sense that people feel the need to do that instead of go to war. Like, I almost hope the Olympics become a bigger thing, but like the money involved is not as great, if that makes sense. So I don't know how you work those two things where like there's more people involved and there's even more talent in the future in the sports world, but there's actually less money involved, because you see, again, sports, you have the athletes, you watch an NFL football game and you can't even watch half the time. I mean, like, again, I'm from Michigan. So like the Detroit Lions this year were an unbelievable team and Super Bowl favorites, like the entire year or whatever, half the year. Well, their team got decimated by injuries. And you have this world where like the rules are such that you have to protect certain guys and do certain things. So guys are getting injured, and so like you can't even watch the game half the time. And there's so much money riding on one guy or certain guys because of this, because of the fiat system we're in, that people are out the risk curve trying to make their payment on their mortgage that month. So they're doing things that otherwise maybe they wouldn't do. So anyway, it's a long rambling way of just trying to say, I hope that sports becomes better in the sense of like just people doing that instead of going to war. You think of like Navy SEALs or you know, spec ops guys. Hopefully those guys are playing sports someday and we don't need them fighting wars as much, right? So it's this weird dynamic, and hope the money becomes less of an aspect of it, but people actually do it more because, hey, I'm well off, or we can do these things and I can just become the best version, use my talents, whatever they are, to the best of my abilities, my artistic or athletic abilities.
I like that in the parable, it doesn't tell you how long that the master's been away, but it does speak to time preference a little bit, because it says he was away for a really long time. And if you think about it, the guys that had 5 and 2, you have no idea what they invested in. Did they buy a vineyard? Because at some point they were out the money. If the master would have come back, he'd been like, "Where's my money?" And they'd be like, I spent half of it buying this thing. Like, the business isn't operating yet." And there've been a couple of athletes like Okung. Russell Okung, who've taken their salary in Bitcoin. The interesting thing about that is, let's say you take your pay in Bitcoin and then you hit a bear market. What do? If you've balled out of control and you've bought like McLarens and houses and who knows what, boats, those payments could come due and you might actually be down. And for people investing in Bitcoin, it's like, yeah, it's a little different than the parable of the talents, because you kind of are burying it by hodling. You're kind of burying it, but you're experiencing a deflation, essentially, which is making the amount of value in dollar terms go up over the long term by holding on to it, which is inherently risky. And there's one thing, it's kind of a weird thing to say about a Bible verse, but I kind of wish that it was a little different. I wish that within these guys, there was a shitcoiner. And there was like one guy who made really bad investments, because there are people who would do that. Like, we're taking a risk by investing in Bitcoin, but it's a very, very calculated risk that we've studied. We feel a conviction about. And there are a lot of people out there right now who are working hard to just gamble on
Yeah.
altcoins that
Yeah.
are complete scams. And in this parable, the master is essentially it's symbolizing God, essentially, who is ultimately wise, knows who he's choosing, knows who has the ability and who is going to make the wise investments. So in this parable, he's not going to choose somebody like that. But in reality, you have a lot of things that you have the opportunity to invest or gamble in. And so you got to take a risk, but you better do your due diligence.
One thing that's interesting about the last thing you just said, and I think Christians and people in general, like, it's the whole "why do bad things happen to good people" thing. But it goes to, the unfortunate truth of, like, not all people are God's people. Jordan, give me a man for you for that one, but I think that's the truth. Awesome, thank you, Cameron, for freezing. But the other piece is it's always best time always. But I think the thing that's the most unique about this is the guy who got the one was the least trustworthy of the bunch. And so it kind of goes to the master having the foresight to give people according to their ability, but then also give somebody something more than they were capable of. And then he's kind of upset that he kind of lived into the expectation he had. Is like, I'm going to give you more than you can handle, and you just proved to me that I was wrong. And it actually, in the verse, where he goes, and this is actually the second thing that the master said. I'll pull it back up again if people want to read it. But it was probably the most, like, thing that hit me the hardest is where it says, you knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I scattered no seed. And that phrase as a question is more of like, you think that, or rather, my take on it, and Jordan, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it's like you were afraid because you thought that like I'm blanking. I'm like, had it in a second. Went all everywhere. But at the end of the day, he's like, you were afraid, and you thought that by burying it in the ground, like, that would be more valuable than you attempting something. As kind of the way I take it. Is like, the way I take it is like, what you did by doing nothing was even worse than the next line, which is like giving it to the bankers. Like, doing nothing was below the expectation I had for you. Like, the expectation I had for you is to do something. That's where I'm going.
So
like,
I think it's worse than that, actually. And I think this plays itself out. The master asks, like, you knew that I reap where I did not sow? You knew that. That was in your head, right? So why didn't you just do anything? Because it's my money and I would have reaped where I did not sow, right? It's like you knew that. You confess to this, and yet you act contrary to your own knowledge, to your own confession.
And the guy is so arrogant that he's basically saying, yeah, you're the master. You have all this money. I'm actually better than you. I'm actually smarter than you. And yet he didn't even trust in himself to take a risk and to invest. So deep down, he knew that he wasn't actually capable of investing. And yet he tries to pin it on the guy who originally made the capital and say, no, I'm better than you. But deep down, he knows that he's not capable.
And I think what Steven said too, and another aspect of it is, like, the master is clearly accusing him of like either lying or being self-deceived. He's like, you're attributing fault to me, when in reality, like, you are the problem. Like, it's not me that's the problem, it's you that's the problem. And so I think that, and I think, again, to see, I think it's instructive to look at the other two examples, because in the case of both of the other two examples, the master renders to each one according to their works, right? So this is a pattern that we see all throughout Scripture. It's not just sowing and reaping; it's sowing and exponential reaping. So like you take a piece of fruit and you take a seed and you plant the seed in the ground. You don't just get one piece of fruit. You get a tree that produces 100 pieces of fruit. And so you do have like this multiplicative, expectation that God has for when he basically entrusts stuff to us. I think it's also interesting because, like, if you're watching this, you're like, wait, what are talents? Like, is that like our abilities? And actually, like, our word talents today, where we think about like the things that we can do or the abilities that we have, actually comes from this passage. Like this passage had such an impact that like these, talents back then was just an amount of gold, but because of, people applied it more broadly to like all that God has given us, it actually became known as talents. So, if you have a, talent as a basketball player or, whatever, videographer or whatever it is, it comes from this passage.
That's actually interesting too, because I didn't even realize that, thinking through it, but the like the whole thing about the talents, but as he had made two, but talent, as we talked about at the top of this, was a year's worth of wages. And so it's the talent is what you're going to put into a year's worth of effort. And so like if you're, when people say they're talented, like you're a talented football player. If I tell you you're a talented hockey player, immediately what conjures up in my mind is years of effort. And so that's actually interesting. I didn't even think about that, because like the talented, like the charge of that word, this is one of the things that I really loved about C.S. Lewis, of like coming back and like we need to take charge of these words as Christians. It's like, it's so unfortunate that we've kind of ceded so much ground on the battlefield of words, because it's so easy for people to be confused now, because we've sacrificed words like marriage and covenant and all these things. And so it's really, really, that is actually one of the things we talked yesterday on the show about, like, like cathedrals and kind of like what are some of the things that are going to come back. I actually think the old robber baron like way of, and I can't remember, it was Carnegie or it was I think it was Rockefeller, but it was like, don't insult somebody who buys ink by the barrel type thing. It was like the old, it might have been Hearst actually, but he was basically talking about, don't go to war with somebody who can basically print whatever story he wants the world to know and gaslight people into believing a certain thing. And I think what's going to be really, really interesting is as we get to a Bitcoin world, and this is one of my favorite things about, if you've read the white paper and you kind of do any deep diving on Adam Back, like one of the things Adam had was like, basically you have to pay to email somebody. That was like one of the things, if I remember correctly. And it's like, if you think about that based in a Bitcoin world where it's finite, it's like you're going to make a real big deduction of like, do I actually need or want to send this email? And it's going to be really interesting to like, think about everything in a context of, I'm not just going to send junk mail. Like junk mail will actually go away and like lives will be better for it, because you have less stuff for your brain to sift through.
Yeah, there's an opportunity cost. Like Saifedean just had a tweet about this morning, and about how just like one of the downstream effects of the SBR over time will be that it'll basically teach the United States, about the idea of an opportunity cost. Can I mention one other thing, because I think this is really instructive too. So like in this passage, so in this passage you have 3 amounts of money that are given out. All right, but what's the ultimate stand-in for this? Like the ultimate thing that God has given us is our own lives. And so at the end of at the end of, when the master returns, he gives to each one in accordance with what they've done. So like the first guy is super faithful, and so he says, here's 5 more, well done, my good and faithful servant. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He says something similar to the second guy. And so like fruitfulness in, with little brings fruitfulness in rulership over much. And so it's interesting, right? And it's actually pretty fitting. Like if you are a good steward of your life, and what does that look like to be a good steward of your life? At the end of the day, it's to entrust your life to Christ. Like it's to put it in his hands and carry out his will. And so it would make sense that you would be given eternal life, if you steward your life and give it to the person who, is the best steward of it. If you entrust it to his care, then, the reaping that you get is infinite lifetimes effectively. That's how you could, it's kind of eternal life isn't just this random thing. Like it corresponds with you've lived life faithfully. And so I'm going to give you a whole bunch more of them, more than you could possibly, imagine.
I love the double meaning of this parable. It's one of my favorite parables in the Bible. I love that it both applies to creating something, taking risks, and making a profit in the sense of actually making money. And it also applies to evangelism, using the life that God has given you to basically bring light into the world, to essentially to tell other people about Jesus, what God has done to bless your life, so that their life gets blessed. And there is a multiplicative effect that happens that's not just generating profit. It's actually like generating souls that are saved, people that get the blessing of God by you essentially showing the blessing that has been given to you. And it's both applies to business and money making and to evangelism. And yeah, it's just beautiful. In this short little story, you get both of those things.
Random, one more thing, and sorry to jump back in, but I'm actually curious. Brandon, I think your superpower is relationships. Like, you're just a freaking relationship machine. Like, everybody loves you. But I'm very curious, the parables with, or rather the corollaries with the investments here with relationships, because I actually think a lot of, like, myself personally, like, I think I struggle with relationships sometimes, and I don't think I have a good sense sometimes on like the proper way to grow or foster or do these, and I'd actually really love to like hear your take on the application of this to, it's like, to relationships, where it's like, hey, like I'm investing in these things and I'm growing these things, and like perspective on like why I think they're important, how you grow them, how you move them, but then also like how it comes back to this of like, God has given me the ability to talk to a lot of people, minister to a lot of people, spread a message to a lot of people, and I how do you see that kind of playing out here of like, because I'm sure more people are reaching out to you, and you too, Jordan, every day. Like, how do you think this kind of correlates to like relationships, and how does that change in like a Bitcoin world? Like, do relationships become more valuable? Do they become less?
I think relationships are everything. And I'll say this, I appreciate the kind words. I always think that about you, quite honestly. And I look at you guys and I think that. I don't think that about myself. So I appreciate the kind words, but it's not easy. Well, I mean, number one, we're men, right? So like relationships are, like, I think good friendship is like, hey, I can talk to one of you guys like today, and I can talk to you like a year from now, and then it's like we picked up right where we left off, right? And that's the kind of people you want to be around. I find that a lot in Bitcoin. I mean, I will say this is kind of it segues beautifully from the story I was telling earlier of being in athletics. I just didn't get along with a lot of people in athletics, and they just weren't my people. And so like Bitcoiners, again, we could be the 10th time, 100th time we've hung out, or first time. And then like a year from now, we'll just pick right up, right where we left off. And I think that's true probably for the guys that are on here as well in that Bitcoin community. A lot of the Christian community as well. I'm sure that's true as well, right? Like we can just kind of like, we have these core values. And so in saying all that, the community is the number one thing in a survival situation. So it's not gold, or it's not Bitcoin, it's not water. It's, it's like, because whatever you're deficient at, like Jordan said earlier, like if there's a solar flare or whatever happens, it's going to be a mad chaos, right? It's Mad Max at that point. So it's like, who are the people that I'm around, and who am I going to surround myself with? Because that's the only thing that's going to matter, because these people are going to be helping me with what I'm deficient at. And even though a lot of us are, again, Bitcoiners tend to, whether they are just weaponized autists or highly regarded, and they think they are He-Man, or they think they're some lone wolf, and like, I'm just going to do everything myself, which I know is me at times. You aren't, so like that's that humbling process, and the humility test in a way that Bitcoin is, where you have to unlearn a lot of your life in a way and then like relearn it. And I think that's what Bitcoin does so well, is just reframing. I mean, we're all doing it, right? Everyone who's in Bitcoin had to go, and like people think that Bitcoiners are like, you guys are idiots. Like, how come, like, let the free market decide? It's like, well, number one, we are the free market. Like, I am the free market. Jordan, Anton, we're all the free market, and we are free to then educate people on the scams that are going around all around the world. And that's the free market doing free market things. And it's our duty to go do those things, which comes back to the parable, which to me is, don't put your head in the sand. Don't take the blue pill. And it's using your talents, because I'm glad you said that, Jordan, as I forgot. I always think of this parable, and Anton, you were saying it's one of your favorites. I always think of this parable as just strictly talents. I almost never think of it on the money side. I always am thinking of the talents of what have I been given and how can I do things? Because at times I'm, like, why am I doing this? Like, why am I, spouting my mouth off all the time, or writing things, or doing whatever, helping different companies with stuff, or helping Bitcoin trading cards, going to conferences. Like, why am I doing it? I could just have a great life and just go away with my kids and my wife and have a great life. because it's just a deeper meaning, this deeper calling that I think God implanted here in me. And I would say probably you too, knowing you guys, that it's like, we could all just go do something else, but we're called to do this because of the talents we've been given, and to not put our head in the sand, because we could do that. We could just go shoot up heroin and go sit under a bridge too. Like every day we have a choice to go do that, or you'll go do this or go do that. And we all get up and choose every single day. Like, hey, it's not going to be easy. Most of the world's not going to be with us. Like we said earlier, the 97% are not going to be with us. And a lot of them probably never will be. And we are going to have to drag a lot of them kicking and screaming to the finish line, as they did in the American Revolution. And, you know, George Washington going across the Delaware River with icebergs floating by. Like it's not going to be fun. It's not going to be pretty, but some of us are called to use those talents in order to further society and further truth.
Bondor, I'm very curious. Yeah, and you opened up, but like this is seems like exactly like what you've been talking about to me ever since we first met.
Exactly, 100% agree with everything you said, Brandon, and well stated. And let me affirm how real the community thing is. And Anton, you can attest to this. For years, I basically just posted on Facebook as private messages, just screaming at all of my friends, but never actually engaging with the wider Bitcoin community. And since engaging with the wider Bitcoin community, it's like, whoa, these people, it's like part of that was like, I wanted to, like, it was like, Bitcoin is a totally decentralized thing. I wanted to build, it's not like I wanted to do it alone. Like I was engaging people like Anton. But I wanted to build as like, yo, I don't even need to be a satellite for the larger community. I can like literally be my own node with my own network, my own private Bitcoin network. And like, you can do that. You can build that. It's like totally doable. It just is so hard, and it takes so long because you have so much less people in your community. The amount of people that you get when you open up to the broader community is just bonkers. I mean, JD and I restarted the Bitcoin meetup here.
But you can just say like Bondor basically started this new one. I'm going to give you 100% of the credit. Like he is the heart and soul of Nelva Bitcoin. So,
but the point is, once we open that up, it starts with just me and JD because we met at the conference, right? First conference I've ever been
at the bar.
Yeah, sitting with the book at the bar. And since then, a little over a year ago, it's like grown to, the last meeting was 21 people. And like, that is like real people in the real community around our area. Yep. Like there's a coffee shop that's close to us that I went to this week, I think on Tuesday. And like I roll in there at whatever, 9 a.m. And one of the Bitcoiners who's at the at our meetup is there, orange pilling another person. Like, this is LA, like LA proper. It's like, hell yeah, this is what I'm talking about, right?
Dude.
And nobody ever shows up to anything in LA. The fact that 21 people showed up in real life to something.
And these guys are showing up guys and girls. And actually we almost have like we had a couple weeks ago where we have more women than all the women in Bitcoin are in LA, by the way. Just FYI, we've found them. But like
they're just scoping out and prepping for $5 wrench attacks. You know, they're just that's I do okay. So I jokingly say that, but
$15 wrench attacks.
Yeah, exactly. I especially in LA, probably 35. But like no, I do think that we joke, but like I do think that is one easy way, kind of Bondor, what you were saying. Is it's easy to withdraw passively because you're thinking, what's about the worst thing that could happen? I could get $5 wrenched. I could get, whatever. The worst things that could happen that you use them as a justification to just not rock the boat or whatever. And
correct,
yet like
100%.
And yet like so much of even just, I mean, again, we've talked about from a lot of different perspectives, but just, even as a Christian, like one of the verses that I'm like, I don't know how I didn't see this before, but like one of the things about the kingdom of God is like, it's actually like on the offensive. And so, one of the things that Jesus says is that the gates of hell won't stand against it. And for whatever reason, you think about that and you're like, oh, you're like, hell is this big intimidating thing. It's like, no, hell is this gated place. And we're like charging towards it. And the gates are they're not going to be able to stand there forever. We're going to run over the gates. Like we're going to break down the gates and it's not even going to be. Yeah, exactly. So like, yeah, the walls are going to fall. And so like, again, there's going to be people who are going to die in the meantime. There's going to be things that are going to be hard, whatever. But just like the place for just fear and cowardice and hiding and being silent. Like there's just no room. Like there's no room for it. And so if that is your attitude, like that's demonstrating the same type of cowardice that, the master rebukes in this guy here. So
the move is to attack. Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Join the cosmically regarded ones. And,
Nice.
Yeah, no, and I this is such a great thing. I just want to add one quick thing is that it's, God created the devil. Like he's an angel, so it's like he has dominion over him. And that's like, we all forget that. I forget that, it's like you said, fear. That's what made me think of it. Fear is Satan, and it's like the what if, it's the fear. It's these things that just consume you. And that's what Satan wants. And God has control over him. And one of you just mentioned that, kind of something alluded to something that a minute ago was when we think of it too. So I think that's so important to remember that it's against the gates, like God, we will conquer that. We will conquer Satan. That will be conquered. And we just have to remember that he's below God. It's not like, oh, God and Satan are up here fighting each other on equal playing field. Like it's not an equal playing field. And that's what we all have to remember.
Brandon, you said something about
good.
yeah, real quick. So Brandon, you said something about that the way to survive in a catastrophe is basically through community above all else. It's not like having water stored or having guns and ammo or having silver coins to use. Man, we saw that so much with the fires that just happened in LA.
Yeah.
Altadena, I was in the process of moving to a house that burned down. So my entire neighborhood is completely gone. It's
oh my gosh, dude.
It's ash now. But I had always thought, I've been looking at Altadena for years. I live basically adjacent to it, and they don't have community. They say they have community, but they really don't. Nobody knows each other's names. And I am a part of all these Facebook groups for people that live in Altadena. And a lot of them are like, yeah, there was this guy that lived on my street. He drove a red car. He always wore this certain baseball cap. I never got his name. Does anybody know who I'm talking about? I wanted to check on him. Is he okay? Nobody knew each other's names. And a lot of people have GoFundMes. A lot of people didn't get almost any money on their GoFundMes. And then a few people that had really done the work to create a community for themselves, which if you've ever been a part of a community, it takes a little bit of sacrifice. It's a little bit of a risk to go out there in the real world and make friends. And you also have to be generous yourself. And it's so worth it, because when you need that community, if you put in the work, it's there. If you didn't, it's not there.
Yeah, I'll just add one thing. So, one of the dangers of money and over reliance on a monetary economy is that money enables artificial community. Like money basically enables you to buy people to help you, to buy people's attention, to care about you. And so you can, again, that can work for a period of time, but there'll come a point where that'll end, And so this is one of the things where I'll never forget, one of my wife's best friends, one of my best friends, she was married, and I can't remember if they had kids at that point. But we just were talking about having kids, and we just said, we're planning on having, a good number of kids, because when we get old, somebody's gonna have to take care of us. And, even if we just have one or two kids, then that's a lot. Taking care of two parents is a lot for one or two kids. So if you have 4 or 5, 6 kids, whatever, then it's easier to spread the load. And if you don't have any kids, and obviously there's people who are unable to have kids. And so that's a whole different situation. So again, they work it out differently. So this is some condemnation of people who don't get, but what we said was there's people who are just planning, I'm not going to have any kids. That's kind of their game plan now. I'm not going to have any kids because I want to work. I want to make money. I want to do whatever. At the end of your life, you're going to spend the vast majority, if you don't have kids to care for you, you're going to spend the vast majority of your money paying other people to try to care about you, or trying to pay people to convince them to care about you. And in an inflationary world, that gets more expensive than you're ever prepared for. So I think that this is, Bitcoin will kind of help people. I don't know. It's restored people's priorities in a lot of ways just by being a more sane, I don't know. It's more connected to it's more like everything else in the world. Scarce, you have to make yes or no decisions. You can't fudge on it in that way. And so again, I'm optimistic that it'll be helpful over time, and that people will have a healthier view of the world as a result of its ascendance.
You gave me an interesting thought. and I'm actually curious all your takes on this. Do you think Bitcoin is going to make the world bigger? And what I mean by that is, are people going to think more about the opportunity cost of going somewhere? And like, is travel actually going to become less of a thing because Bitcoin is the rising tide? Everything is going to get better everywhere. So you're not going to be discontent where you are because I need to go to America to make money, or I need to do arbitrage, making this thing somewhere else because I can make it somewhere else cheaper. Like is the world going to get bigger again?
Definitely. There's going to be, especially right away, there are going to be some of these smaller countries that essentially go on a Bitcoin standard, and they are going to welcome you. If you want to go there and spend Bitcoin, there's going to be a lot for you to do, and it's going to be open to you. And it will also have an effect where it will somewhat preserve cultures. Like in the middle of the 1900s, you had basically like the Soviet Union. You had these giant blocks of like essentially empires. I was looking at the Japanese Empire in 1942. It was massive. It was like 1/3 of the size of Russia now. And we're going away from that to where you're going to have sovereign individuals and you're going to have little sovereign enclaves, kind of like what theoretically we're seeing in El Salvador now.
Yeah, I think it'll become, and I think what you're alluding to, JD, is that will people, in essence, live in their citadels? Will they kind of just live there more? And you're going to have people that might move around, like Anton was saying, like in the near future type of thing. But 50 years from now, 100 years from now, are we traveling as much? Does the world become bigger in that sense? Like where we're just not traveling as much? Like, hey, I'm content because I have 6 kids and I have my whole family here. We've got our wealth. We've got what we need. I don't need to go travel. Because again, the symptom of the society, and we're all about the same age. You saw the last 20 years, a lot of people leaving. I mean, again, in the Midwest, you have people leaving because of job opportunities, money, and I want to go travel. Travel became so easy. It was like, I want to go do things. My parents have wealth, so like I'm going to go travel and do stuff. I'm living in LA, living in whatever, Chicago. I'm living in New York City, and it was like cool. It was trendy to leave your family. And now what do we see? We see senior centers everywhere, assisted living, because no one has the money to pay for their parents, or there are no kids really because they're gone and they're too busy making money that they can't even take care of their parents. So you're gonna have this world where I do believe, I hope. I mean, to me, like the senior housing stuff is very sad. Like I just have a very different take on that, and it's not the typical take. I'm sure a lot of Bitcoiners would probably have a similar take, but it's society is like, oh, look at this, is great. Like, look at these facilities taking. It's like, where are the people's family? It's like, where are the people that love them? Like what is going on? And it's a symptom again of late stage fiat, has been mentioned many times. But I do hope that kind of turns around and we build these compounds or citadels or these communities that are decentralized, built on community, and they are local, because that's, as we know, just governing wise, like we talked from the beginning, governance is way easier locally. Getting back to this standard of taking care of just the people right around us. That's the easiest way, obviously, humans have found to govern and work things. So I do think it might take 50 years, 100 years, but I think we're going to get to a more of the world is bigger, where I don't have to feel like I have to travel all over because everyone else is doing it. I think it just naturally starts to kind of heal again.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think at the same time, though, like just given the dynamics of how much Bitcoin is out there and how much Bitcoin, like how expensive Bitcoin is, like it's going to be harder and harder for your average person to be able to, make a meaningful amount of Bitcoin. So I think that probably the bigger challenge is going to be, well, I don't know about bigger. I don't know how to even evaluate the size of the challenge. Basically, I would say, like, in some ways, the parable of the talents is going to be relevant to people who are Bitcoiners at this point, because like, you're going to have, I mean, if things continue to, to go along the same kind of lines as they've been going, like if you have any kind of significant amount of Bitcoin, like you're going to have a staggering amount of money, and you're going to be trying to figure out, again, like, what do I do with this? How do I steward this in effective ways? And again, just, I think thinking about that, the sooner you start thinking about that, like, what are the things that are important to me? I just think that's something you ought to be doing, because again, like I have people in my feed who are totally rational people, again, who are older, who've been in, lived the world, and they're basically saying, I'm upping my price, like the odds of Bitcoin going to $1 million by the end of this year just got a whole lot bigger. And so I just think like this can move so fast, like the speed that this thing can move, and then the position it would put anybody who's got a meaningful amount of Bitcoin in. Yeah, I just think it could get bonkers really quick. And and I think if that's happening at the same time as you have so many cultures around the world who are, their currencies are failing and things are getting harder and harder, I think you could see, just it could get a lot worse before it gets be better on a large scale. So.
Somebody was putting a TA, a TA bro was putting something down, but the 14th is apparently when we're supposed to get to our next all-time high. Not saying the peak, but when we're supposed to break the previous one is the 14th. So 7 days from now, I don't know. I just have a hunch we'll be at 140 a week from now. And I think
the strategic Bitcoin reserve thing took everybody by surprise. Who expected that in the afternoon yesterday?
Well, not even. Well, actually, nobody expected. I did not expect it until today because they're having the meeting today, and I was like, okay, so maybe we hear something at the end of the day today, or maybe we hear something on Monday. And candidly, I think the people, and if you're watching this, I don't. A significant amount of Bitcoin is any. Any portion, and you don't have to have Bitcoins, or you don't have to have a whole coin or whatever. A significant amount of Bitcoin is going to be any Bitcoin, and at certain points in time. And I think the thing that's really interesting that I haven't really thought about, but I think it was David Bailey who actually posted this. But there is not enough Bitcoin now for every millionaire in the United States to own one. And so the thing to think about right now is the people who are going to have the most regret when it comes to Bitcoin ownership are not the poor, it's the rich.
Well, most specifically, it's the boomers who have houses that they need to all sell now because they need to pay for their retirement because they don't have kids that are going to pay for them or take care of them.
So it's going to be really interesting to actually see this transfer of wealth and actually see the countries I'm actually the most excited for when it comes to being on a Bitcoin standard, Bitcoin in general, like Italy. We have family in Italy, and
America.
America too, but I think we have the Cantillon effect, so I think we're probably better off than most. And if you're not familiar with that, especially we are the money printer and we're the closest there, so we benefit the most. Sorry, everybody else that we're screwing over with our worthless cockbucks.
We also get screwed the most because the money printer destroys the culture, which is why we have such destroyed culture here.
Yeah. Speaking of Italy again, is some of these things can be preserved, and I think the other thing is though, not only are they going to be preserved, is it's actually going to potentially, if this can come. I hope we get to 1 million by Christmas. Like I posted earlier this week, we're going to get to 1 million by Christmas. I don't know if we are, but I really, really want us to, because I do believe the issue we have is, the money printers screwed things up so much. And these people, you can't, in Italy, the employment rate for people under the age of 35 is 20%, something like that. It's nuts. And it's we have a family member here and she's been telling us, she's like, my generation has no hope, and so they have no dreams and no desire, and they don't do anything. And so it's when we can instantiate hopes and dreams and balance to some of these things by pouring kerosene, I think Bitcoin is economic kerosene in a good way. It's going to wipe everything away and it's going to supercharge everything all at the same time. I think it's going to be really, really interesting to see what happens. I think the global South is going to come roaring back in the next. I think the 2030s and the 2040s are going to be LATAM, Africa, Southeast Asia, and India. It's going to be wild seeing those cultures develop on a Bitcoin standard.
I think that I just think Go ahead.
I was just going to say I like that the answers so far have just been all of the above.
I just think it's kind of you look at the mountain from the front of it and you're like, oh, look, it's just straight up. And then you look at it from the side and it's actually it's up and down, but it gradually goes up. Because I just look at, you look at, there's so many things that the attention economy, or just the things like OnlyFans. There's this chick, I can't remember her name, Lily something, she's going to nursing homes. Yeah, she's going to nursing homes now and having sex with old men in the nursing homes and filming it and then making money off of this. So I'm just thinking that's an American person who is, relative comfort, and obviously like wealth brings extravagance and all this kind of stuff.
I think she's
But I
English,
just think like,
but
yeah, sure. You're right. So, but like you got,
we don't
so
think-
you've got, but you've got this. What is it going to do if people realize how worthless their dollars are? Like, what lengths are they going to be willing to go to make Bitcoin? Like that, I don't know. I could just see this getting really, really bad again. Like, you look at the Roman Empire. Like, how bad did it get? They literally threw Christians in a ring with lions. And like I mean, this is just the cultural degradation that happened. So, like, I don't know. Like, I'm hopeful over the long term, but just if you told me in the next 10 to 15 years that we had, actual Hunger Games, like TV shows where it was all actually happening, like I could totally believe it. Like, it wouldn't surprise me.
As long as it's central bankers, I'm
like
down.
hard
game.
disagree. I
Okay.
100%
Listen,
hard disagree.
I hope so. Again, we've been following the path of Rome for pretty closely. So I'm just
Jordan
saying,
and
it wouldn't
I
surprise me.
are kindred spirits here, and Bondor's the
Hard
optimist.
disagree. There's none of that's going to happen.
Okay.
And JD, you and I have talked about this. We definitely butt heads on this, and I think it's a healthy butting heads.
It's great. Every meetup, people are like, "You
Yeah.
want positivity? Talk to that guy. You want negativity? Go over there."
But
man.
I really don't see that, because we have Bitcoin that no one can control. This is completely unlike any other historical paradigm.
Mhm.
On top of that, it takes a monumental amount of effort just to understand what you have.
Sure.
And that applies for both camps, right? The people who want to destroy the world versus the people who want to rebuild the world better. Not to build back better. So how does this play out practically? Well, practically, anybody who's denominated in Bitcoin has a firewall against inflation, which means that their entire lives, like, the world can be crumbling around them because of crazy hyperinflation, etc., but they're still fine. Like, they're 100% able to still buy groceries. They're 100% able to, like, their family's insulated from the insanity at a monetary level, right? Now, of course, there's societal issues or whatever, but like, think about what a firewall is. It's literally a wall of fire that you cannot cross. You cannot cross this chasm. And everybody who's protected by the firewall, you guys are good. Anybody can get the firewall themselves, right? So I shared this article again. It's an old Satoshi Nakamoto Institute article, but it's the Bitcoin's shroud of allure and subtlety, where you're basically, the game theory says you're better off just adopting Bitcoin than you are fighting it or trying to attack people or doing any of this stuff, because you can have the firewall. Why would you just like try and fight the firewall when you can just have it, right? You just trade your wealth for Bitcoin and you're good to go. You don't have to suffer inflation anymore. So that's just the inflation piece of the puzzle. There's all sorts of other pieces of the puzzle, like with the time preferences and with the the way that it stops the absurd erosion of culture. Like, it really does. Like, this is not, like, we're talking about something, Jordan and I tend to agree, like, there's nothing new under the sun, but like, and of course this isn't anything new. Like, things like this have happened in history, but it's always been small. This is the whole world, and it's all happening at once.
Sure.
The end dynamic of like Bitcoin going to 1 million this year, I really just don't see it. Like, yeah, if it does do that, well, that's not necessarily going to be a function of Bitcoin's value increasing, because it's going to take way longer than a year for people to even understand that the value has increased, right? So if Bitcoin goes to 1 million in a year, what that says is the US dollar has just hyperinflated, and there's no other, like, the amount of Bitcoin ecosystem stuff, all of that has only built up.
Or what it'll
the
say,
cost of that year.
or what it'll say, it'll because again, the reality is there's information asymmetry. So you had the world radically change in 1913 with the creation of the Federal Reserve. A small group of people, very small group of people, made a decision that they benefited from tremendously to the detriment of everybody else. And so like I could totally see, because again, if you have the governmental officials who are controlling the money printers in all of these countries, who basically see the writing on the wall, none of their people do, or very few of their people do, but they go, wait, right now the game is up. We can print money right now to buy Bitcoin. And then they all start to, or like 4 or 5 of them start doing that. Like you could see, I mean, it could get crazy really quickly. And so again, I don't think it requires tons of people. It only requires a very small group of people who are the ones who most know that this whole system is a Ponzi scheme, like fiat currencies are Ponzi schemes. I just think, and again, I'm not talking in terms of people. I just think the reality is, even in the United States, the number of people who are going to be able to accumulate through their savings or selling things that they have to accumulate a good amount of Bitcoin is going to be still relatively small. And as it sets in, that again, it's in some ways it's going to be a path to nowhere to try to accumulate a large amount of Bitcoin. Like, what lengths are people going to be willing to go to in their extreme, like hopelessness or something, or like their extreme like jadedness to try to accumulate more? Is it going to be, are we going to see, more extreme examples than this Lily girl? Are we going to see, again, things like, I don't even want to put things out there, but I just think I think we're just not prepared for, because again, will that be the smart thing to do? Well, no, on a long enough time horizon, of course not. But people are not smart. Like people are not good. They make stupid decisions, short-sighted decisions all the time. And I don't think that Bitcoin it's going to change it at a societal level over time, but there's still going to be hundreds of thousands of individual people who we're going to be able to point to as saying those are ridiculous decisions that have affected a lot of people in poor ways.
For me, that really comes down to just the market dynamics of bubble dynamics and hysterical popular delusions and the madness of crowds kind of like mentality. But what's the end result of that? Well, the end result of that is everyone sells all their homes, buys Bitcoin, and then there's no more buyers anymore. The market crashes, and it's no different than any of the bubbles we've already seen time and time again in Bitcoin. Just it's like all the leverage for all the things, and it's just people will go crazy at the market top, the market tops, they go crazy, and then it's just it crashes, and everyone's like, wait a second, what was I thinking? And
I guess what I'm saying is like, again, I think the housing market, market needs to crash. Like, it's unhealthy that it's at a level, but like, if that's caused by Bitcoin, people are going to be like, this is the worst thing ever. Bitcoin is the worst thing ever. And again, it's because of how many people are going to be adversely affected by it, even though it was doomed to fail anyhow. And even if Bitcoin didn't exist, it was going to crash anyhow. I think you're still going to have people, and especially, you have the media and whatever, there's incentive for people to tell the media to fault Bitcoin and to do all these kind of things. Again, it doesn't mean it's actually true, but this
is why you got to move out of Florida and move to Los Angeles, where the real estate is far more, solid.
We would welcome you. Well, this gives us lots to talk about on future episodes. I love the idea of talking about what people will be willing to do when there's crazy scarcity in Bitcoin. But we should probably wrap it up. So I just want to thank Brandon_Gentile. JM Bush writes, Jordan, thanks for coming on today. Bondor, JD. And that's it. Better Buy Bitcoin. Check us out on YouTube, because we just created a YouTube channel. It's Better Buy BY Bitcoin. And we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, boys.
Got a good thing coming, and it's all I need.